In a school where success was measured by designer labels and luxury cars, a grease-covered mechanic was about to teach everyone an unforgettable lesson about true value. No one expected that by the end of that day, the same parents who turned up their noses would be lining up to shake his oil-stained hands. This is a story about how a father's love and dedication changed an entire school's perspective in ways no one expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a crisp autumn morning in Oak Ridge Heights, an up-and-coming suburb where luxury cars gleamed in driveways and perfectly manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see. The sound of leaf blowers and sprinkler systems filled the air as maintenance crews worked tirelessly to maintain the neighborhood's pristine image. In stark contrast, at Riverside Auto Works, tucked away in the more modest part of town, Dominic Rivera's skilled hands moved with practiced precision over a Mercedes engine. His small garage wasn't much to look at from the outside. The red brick building had seen better days with its weathered sign and oil-stained parking lot, but the steady stream of loyal customers told the real story of Dom's expertise. Inside, the workshop was a symphony of mechanical sounds, the rhythmic tapping of wrenches, the whir of pneumatic tools, and the occasional grunt of satisfaction when a particularly tricky problem was solved. "Dad, the science fair setup starts in 2 hours," called out 12-year-old Noah, bursting through the office door. Unlike his father's well-worn workspace, Noah stood proudly in his freshly pressed school uniform, a crisp white shirt, navy blazer, and perfectly knotted tie. In his arms, he carefully balanced a complex model of a hybrid engine, a project that had consumed their evenings for the past month. The model represented everything they both loved: Noah's brilliant mind for science and Dom's deep understanding of mechanics. His acceptance into Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy had been a proud moment for both of them, even if the tuition stretched Dom's budget to its limits. Dom had insisted on sending Noah to the prestigious school despite the financial strain. Education first, everything else second, he'd always say, even if it meant taking extra repair jobs late into the night. "I'll be there, mijo, just need to finish Mr. Wilson's transmission," Dom replied, his tanned face glistening with sweat under the shop lights. Being a single father meant juggling countless responsibilities, but he'd never missed one of Noah's big moments, and he wasn't about to start now. He'd been raising Noah alone since his wife passed away 6 years ago, and every day since then had been a careful balance of work, parenting, and keeping their small family together. The morning sun streamed through the garage's dusty windows, catching the floating particles of metal and dust in its rays. Dom's workspace was organized chaos, tools arranged in a system only he understood, diagrams and repair manuals scattered across his workbench, and a wall full of certifications and thank you notes from satisfied customers. Among them hung Noah's perfect attendance certificates and honor roll awards, proudly displayed next to the shop's business license. "Promise you won't forget. Dr. Barnes is judging this year, and she's the head of the science department," Noah added, adjusting his project nervously. His dark eyes, so much like his mother's, sparkled with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Dom noticed how Noah's fingers fidgeted with the edge of his blazer, a telltale sign of his son's nervousness that reminded him so much of Maria. "Have I ever let you down?" Dom asked, wiping his hands on a shop rag and walking over to examine Noah's project one last time. The model was impressive, a perfect blend of their two worlds. Noah had incorporated some of Dom's real-world mechanical knowledge into the theoretical design, creating something unique that neither of them could have achieved alone. "Never," Noah replied with a grin, relaxing slightly. "Just try to be on time. And maybe—" He glanced at Dom's grease-stained coveralls but trailed off, not wanting to hurt his father's feelings. I know, I'll clean up and change before I come," Dom promised, though they both knew how busy the shop could get. He watched as Noah carefully maneuvered his project through the door, heading for the school bus that would take him to the other side of town, the side where people like them usually only went to fix things. The morning rushed by in a blur of oil changes, brake repairs, and the constant ring of the shop phone. Dom had barely noticed the time slipping away as he worked under a stubborn Audi that had already been sent back from the dealership twice. His reputation for fixing the unfixable meant his small shop often got the most challenging cases, the ones that kept him hunched over engines long after other mechanics would have given up. "Dom, there's an emergency," called out Eddie, his sole employee from the front office. "Got Mrs. Peterson stranded on Highway 40 with her kids. Alternators completely dead." Dom glanced at the clock on the wall, 1:15 p.m. The science fair judging started at 2 p.m., and he'd promised Noah he'd be there early to help set up. "How far out is she?" Dom asked, already knowing he couldn't ignore a stranded family. His own years of struggling as a single parent had taught him the importance of helping others in tough situations. Mrs. Peterson was a regular customer, a fellow single parent who relied on her car to get her 3 kids to and from their various activities. "About 20 minutes from here. She's got the little ones with her, Dom." Eddie's voice carried the weight of understanding. He knew about Noah's science fair, but he also knew his boss's heart. Dom wiped his forehead with his sleeve, leaving another streak of grease across his already dirty face. "Call her back. Tell her I'm on my way." He grabbed his mobile repair kit and headed for his tow truck, his mind already calculating times and distances. If everything went perfectly, he could rescue Mrs. Peterson and still make it to the science fair. It would be tight, but doable. The autumn sun beat down on the highway as Dom pulled up behind Mrs. Peterson's stranded minivan. Her 3 young children waved from the back seat, their faces pressing against the windows in relief at seeing a familiar face. "Thank goodness you're here," Mrs. Peterson said, stepping out of the car. "I tried calling the dealership, but they said it would be hours." Dom went straight to work, his experienced hands moving quickly through the diagnostic process. The alternator was indeed shot, but he'd anticipated this and brought a replacement, one of the many ways he went above and beyond for his customers. As he worked, sweat dripping onto the hot engine, he kept checking his phone. 1:40 p.m. His chest tightened with each passing minute. "How much do I owe you?" Mrs. Peterson asked as her engine roared back to life. Her relief was palpable. She'd been worried about missing her youngest daughter's doctor's appointment. "We'll sort it out later," Dom replied, already packing up his tools. "Just swing by the shop tomorrow." He jumped back into his truck, knowing he'd have to break a few speed limits to make it to Oak Ridge Prep on time. His work coveralls were soaked with sweat and covered in fresh grease, and there was no time to go home and change as he'd promised Noah. The contrast between his beat-up tow truck and the luxury vehicles in the Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy parking lot couldn't have been more stark. Range Rovers, BMWs, and Mercedes lined the spaces, their polished surfaces reflecting the afternoon sun. Dom parked his truck at the far end of the lot, hoping to be less conspicuous, but the rattling diesel engine had already drawn several disapproving glances from parents in business suits and designer dresses. His heart sank as he caught his reflection in the truck's side mirror. His face was streaked with grease, his dark hair disheveled, and his coveralls were a mess of oil stains and grime. There wasn't even time to wash his hands properly. The old Dom might have turned around, made up an excuse about an emergency, saved Noah the embarrassment, but he'd promised his son he'd be there, and some promises were too important to break. Grabbing his shop rag from his back pocket, he made a futile attempt to wipe some of the grease from his hands and face. The clock on his phone read 1:58 p.m. He was cutting it impossibly close, but he'd made it. As he jogged toward the school's impressive entrance, he could feel the stares of other parents burning into his back. A group of mothers in expensive suits visibly stepped aside as he passed, as if his grease-stained presence might somehow contaminate their carefully curated appearance. Through the glass doors, he could see the school's grand atrium transformed into a spectacular showcase of young scientific minds. Elaborate projects lined the tables, each one more impressive than the last. Somewhere in there was his son, probably wondering if his father had forgotten his promise. The pristine hallways of Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy felt a mile long as Dom made his way toward the science fair. The squeaking of his work boots against the polished marble floors echoed through the corridor, drawing attention from every direction. Display boards and proud parents filled the massive atrium, where crystal chandeliers cast elegant shadows over state-of-the-art science projects. "Sir, excuse me?" A sharp voice cut through the ambient chatter. A well-dressed woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair and a name tag reading, Dr. Catherine Barnes, head of science department, approached him with a look of concern. "The building maintenance entrance is around the back. This is a private school event." Dom felt his face flush beneath the grease stains. "I'm Noah Rivera's father," he said, straightening his shoulders despite his embarrassment. "I'm here for the science fair." Dr. Barnes's expression shifted from dismissive to surprised, then to something approaching discomfort. "Oh, I see," she said, her tone making it clear she hadn't expected Noah's father to look quite like this. "The judging is about to begin. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting in the—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Designated parent area." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before Dom could respond, he heard his son's voice. "Dad, you made it!" Noah was practically bouncing with excitement as he rushed over, either oblivious to or choosing to ignore the tension in the air. His project stood proudly on a table near the center of the room, the hybrid engine model gleaming under the chandelier lights. "Wouldn't miss it, mijo," Dom replied, conscious of the grease marks on his uniform, but trying to focus on his son's smile. He noticed Robert Maxwell, one of his occasional customers, quickly steering his daughter away from them, despite having brought his BMW to Riverside Auto Works just last month. Noah grabbed his father's hand, uncaring of the oil stains, and pulled him toward his project. "I got everything set up, but I could use your help with the demonstration part." The love and pride in his son's voice made Dom momentarily forget about the judgmental stares surrounding them. The project was impressive, a working model demonstrating how hybrid engines could be modified for better efficiency. Dom felt his chest swell with pride as Noah explained the concept, seamlessly blending theoretical knowledge from his textbooks with practical insights he'd learned from countless hours in the garage. "Mr. Rivera," a cold voice interrupted. It was Robert Maxwell, now standing with a small group of other parents. "I believe you worked on my car recently. I hope you're not getting any grease on the display tables. These were just refinished last month." A few parents snickered behind their hands. Dom opened his mouth to respond, but Noah beat him to it. "Actually, Mr. Maxwell, Dad helped me understand how real engines work. That's why my project is different from everyone else's. It's not just theory, it's practical application." Dr. Barnes approached again, clipboard in hand. "Well, let's see what you have, Noah." Her tone was professional but carried an undercurrent of skepticism as she glanced between the grease-stained father and the pristine project. Noah launched into his presentation, his voice clear and confident. "My project explores how hybrid engine efficiency can be improved by implementing real-world mechanical principles. My dad taught me that theoretical knowledge is only half the equation. Understanding how things work in practice is just as important." As Noah demonstrated the working model, Dom noticed something wasn't quite right. The small electric motor wasn't engaging properly with the mechanical components. His trained ear picked up the slight misalignment before anyone else could see it. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "May I?" he asked his son quietly. Noah nodded, trust evident in his eyes. Dom's skilled hands, still bearing traces of the day's work, made a minor adjustment to the mechanism. The model hummed to life perfectly, drawing gasps from the gathering crowd. "That's quite impressive, Doctor," Barnes admitted, making notes on her clipboard. "Noah, could you explain the practical applications of this modification?" As Noah expertly detailed the real-world implications, Dom noticed more parents gathering around. Despite their initial disdain, they couldn't help but be drawn in by the perfect fusion of academic theory and practical knowledge displayed before them. Even Robert Maxwell had stopped smirking and was watching with genuine interest. A young girl tugged at her father's sleeve nearby. "Daddy, why can't our car's engine work that smoothly?" she asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Her father, whom Dom recognized as a local business executive, shifted uncomfortably. The atmosphere in the atrium began to shift as Noah's presentation continued. What had started as a small group of skeptical onlookers had grown into a substantial crowd. Dom stood quietly beside his son, his presence no longer drawing looks of disdain, but rather curious glances as Noah explained how his father's real-world expertise had influenced every aspect of the design. "The fascinating thing about hybrid engines," Noah explained, his eyes bright with enthusiasm, "is that most people think it's just about combining electric and gas power. But Dad taught me that efficiency isn't just about the technology. It's about understanding how each part works together in harmony. Like a symphony," he says. Dr. Barnes leaned forward, her initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. "That's an interesting analogy. Could you elaborate on that?" She glanced at Dom, who had been silently observing his son's moment to shine. Dom cleared his throat, suddenly aware that all eyes were on him. "May I?" he asked, looking at both Noah and Dr. Barnes. When they nodded, he stepped forward, momentarily forgetting about his grease-stained appearance. "You see," he began, his hands moving with the same precision they used on engines. "Every engine has its own rhythm, its own voice. When something's wrong, it's like a musician hitting the wrong note. The trick isn't just knowing the theory. It's about listening, feeling, understanding the whole system as one unit." He pointed to specific parts of Noah's model. "What Noah's done here is remarkable because he's combined textbook efficiency with real-world practicality. In theory, many things work perfectly, but in the real world, you need to account for variables that no textbook can teach you." Robert Maxwell stepped forward, his previous contempt replaced by curiosity. "Is that why my BMW's performance improved so dramatically after you worked on it? The dealership couldn't figure it out for months." Dom nodded, warming to the subject he knew best. "Exactly. Your car's computer was showing perfect readings, but the engine wasn't singing right. Sometimes you need to look beyond the numbers to find the real story." A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. Another parent, a professor from the local university, raised his hand. "My Tesla's been making an odd noise, but the service center says everything's fine. Would you mind taking a look at it?" "My Porsche, too," added another parent. "The dealership keeps saying it's normal, but something feels off." Noah beamed with pride as he watched his father transform from an out-of-place mechanic into the center of attention. The very parents who had been avoiding eye contact earlier were now crowding around, eager to learn more. Dr. Barnes watched this transformation with growing appreciation. "Noah," she said, "your project demonstrates something we often forget in academia, the vital connection between theoretical knowledge and practical application. This is exactly the kind of real-world integration we try to encourage." The conversation expanded beyond just Noah's project. Parents began sharing their own car troubles, and Dom found himself giving impromptu advice about engine maintenance and efficiency. His hands, still bearing the honest marks of his day's work, gestured expressively as he explained complex mechanical concepts in ways anyone could understand. "It's like that hybrid engine model," Dom explained to the growing crowd. "Noah's textbooks taught him the theoretical maximum efficiency, but our work in the garage showed him why those numbers don't always match reality. That's when he came up with these modifications." He pointed to specific innovations in the design that had the parents nodding in understanding. A young student raised her hand. "Mr. Rivera, would you consider giving a guest lecture in our engineering club? We're working on an electric car project and—" She glanced at Dr. Barnes hopefully. Dr. Barnes nodded enthusiastically. "Actually, that's an excellent idea. Mr. Rivera, would you be interested in becoming a technical advisor for our STEM program? Your practical experience would be invaluable to our students." Dom stood there, momentarily speechless. Just an hour ago, these same people had been trying to direct him to the maintenance entrance. Now they were asking him to help shape their children's education. He felt Noah's hand slip into his, giving it a proud squeeze. "I would be honored," Dom replied, his voice thick with emotion. As long as you don't mind a little grease on the textbooks. Frr. The crowd laughed. Not at him this time, but with him. As the afternoon continued, the science fair had transformed into something unexpected. The rigid formality of the event had melted away, replaced by an atmosphere of genuine curiosity and respect. The grand atrium, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, no longer felt cold and intimidating. Instead, it hummed with excitement as parents who had arrived in designer suits worth more than Dom's monthly income clustered around Noah's table, their children eagerly asking questions about engines and mechanical principles. "Mr. Rivera," called out Amanda Pierce, the well-dressed head of the PTA, her Cartier bracelet catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically. "My son Thomas hasn't stopped talking about cars since your impromptu lesson. The way you explained the hybrid system was remarkable. He finally understands what he's been struggling with in physics class for months. Would you consider hosting a workshop for the students? We could arrange it as part of our career exploration program." Dom watched as Thomas, a shy boy in a perfectly pressed uniform, nodded vigorously behind his mother. The same kid who had earlier shifted uncomfortably away from Dom's grease-stained presence was now clutching a notebook filled with hastily scribbled diagrams of engines. Before Dom could respond, Dr. William Chen, a quantum physics professor at the local university, chimed in. "My daughter's engineering club would love that too. These kids need to see that success isn't just about theoretical knowledge. It's about practical skills and real-world problem-solving. I've been teaching for 20 years, but I've never seen students this engaged in understanding mechanical principles." The crowd around Noah's table had grown so large that younger students were perching on chairs to see over the adults' shoulders. The model hybrid engine sat at the center of attention, its perfectly synchronized parts humming quietly, a testament to the harmony between father and son's different kinds of expertise. Dr. Barnes, who had been observing the scene with growing appreciation, stepped forward through the crowd. Her earlier skepticism had been replaced by a look of genuine respect. "I believe we've found our science fair winner," she announced, holding up her clipboard with a warm smile. "Noah Rivera's project demonstrates exactly what we strive for at Heartwarming. The perfect blend of academic excellence and practical innovation. This is what real education looks like." Noah's eyes widened in disbelief, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the display table. "Really? We won?" He looked up at his father, his face glowing with pride and joy. Dom felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched his son accept the first-place ribbon, remembering all the late nights they'd spent working on the project, the oil-stained notebooks filled with calculations, and the countless moments of trial and error. "What truly sets this project apart," Dr. Barnes continued, addressing the crowd that now filled nearly half the atrium, "is how it bridges the gap between theory and application. In our pursuit of academic excellence, we sometimes forget that knowledge without practical application is only half the equation. And I must say, Mr. Rivera," she turned to Dom with genuine respect in her eyes, "we've been missing something important in our curriculum. Our students need more exposure to real-world expertise like yours." Robert Maxwell, who had earlier made the snide comment about grease on the tables, pushed through the crowd. His expensive suit seemed less impressive now, almost costume-like compared to Dom's honest work clothes. "Dom, I owe you an apology," he said, extending his hand. "I judged you by your appearance, and I was wrong. The way you explained complex engineering principles to our kids today, that's real education. I watched my daughter actually understand mechanical physics for the first time." The crowd murmured in agreement, and Dom noticed several parents looking somewhat ashamed of their earlier behavior. He took Maxwell's hand, leaving a slight smudge of grease that neither of them seemed to mind anymore. The handshake felt like a bridge being built between two worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just hours ago. "You know," Dom said, addressing the gathering, his voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who truly knows their craft, "every day in my shop I see how theory meets reality. These luxury cars you drive, they're engineering masterpieces, but they still need someone who understands their heart and soul to keep them running. That's what I tried to teach Noah. Respect for both science and the craft. Every engine tells a story if you know how to listen. Sophia Chen, Dr. Chen's daughter and president of the engineering club, pushed forward through the crowd, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. Mr. Rivera, can you teach us how to build an electric go-kart? My dad bought me one, but I want to understand how it works, not just drive it. Maybe we could even modify it to be more efficient, like Noah's hybrid model. Several other students nodded enthusiastically, already forming a circle around Sophia. Dom looked around at the faces of parents and children alike, all waiting for his response. The grease under his fingernails and the stains on his coveralls no longer felt like marks of shame, but badges of honor, earned through years of dedication to his craft. The same hands that had felt out of place among the school's polished surfaces were now being viewed as tools of valuable knowledge. "Tell you what," he said, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Why don't we start a weekend workshop at my garage? Theory in the classroom is important, but there's nothing like getting your hands dirty to really understand how things work. We could start with basic engine principles and work our way up to hybrid and electric systems." The suggestion was met with immediate enthusiasm. Parents began pulling out their phones, eager to sign their children up for what would become Riverside Auto Works' first junior mechanics program. Even Dr. Barnes was making notes, already envisioning how to integrate this practical knowledge into the school's curriculum. Noah tugged at his father's sleeve, his eyes shining with pride. "Dad, does this mean I can finally tell everyone that I helped you rebuild that Mustang engine last summer? And about how we modified Mrs. Wilson's hybrid to improve its fuel efficiency?" The question drew laughs and more impressed looks from the crowd. Dom ruffled his son's hair, not caring that he left a small grease smudge. "Mijo, you can tell them everything, including how you figured out the timing belt issue that had me stumped for days. That's the kind of problem-solving these kids need to learn." As the science fair drew to a close, the atrium buzzed with a new kind of energy. Parents who had arrived in their designer clothes and luxury cars were now gathered around Dom, phones in hand, scheduling appointments not just for car repairs, but for their children's education. The transformation was remarkable, from sideways glances and whispered judgments to genuine respect and excitement. "Mr. Rivera," Dr. Barnes said, her professional demeanor now warm and engaging, "would you consider joining our school board's technical advisory committee? We clearly need your perspective in shaping our STEM curriculum. Your practical expertise could revolutionize how we teach engineering principles to our students." Dom looked down at his grease-stained hands, then at Noah, who was still beaming with pride as he carefully packed up their winning project. "I'd be honored," he replied, "but on one condition, we keep it real. No fancy suits, no pretense. The kids need to see that real learning often comes with dirty hands and hard work." The group of parents around him nodded in agreement. Robert Maxwell, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic change in attitude, stepped forward again. "Speaking of keeping it real, I have a proposition for you, Dom. My investment firm has been looking to support local businesses that make a difference in the community. Would you be interested in discussing an expansion of your garage? We could set up a proper teaching space for these weekend workshops." Dom felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Just hours ago, he had been worried about embarrassing his son, and now— "That's very generous, Mr. Maxwell, but—" "Please call me Rob," Maxwell interrupted. "And it's not generosity, it's good business. You have something valuable to offer these kids, something they can't get from textbooks alone." Sophia Chen, still excited about the electric go-kart idea, chimed in. "Dad, can we clear out the garage this weekend? Mr. Rivera could use our space for additional workshops until his garage is expanded." Her father, the quantum physics professor, laughed and nodded, adding another layer to the growing community support. As parents continued to gather around, sharing ideas and making plans, Noah slipped his hand into his father's. "Dad," he whispered, "remember when I was worried about telling kids at school that you were just a mechanic?" His voice carried a touch of shame at the memory. Dom squeezed his son's hand. "We all learn our lessons differently, mijo. Sometimes the most important ones come from our mistakes. He looked around at the transformed atmosphere of the school atrium. Speaking of lessons, I think we all learned something valuable today. Mrs. Pierce, the PTA head, overheard their conversation. We certainly did, she said, her earlier formality replaced by genuine warmth. You know, Mr. Rivera, my late father was a carpenter. He used to say that working with your hands was as much an art as any painting hanging in a museum. I forgot that wisdom somewhere along the way, trying to fit into this world of degrees and titles. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows of the atrium, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Parents were beginning to gather their children's projects, but nobody seemed in a hurry to leave. Small groups had formed throughout the space, discussing everything from engine mechanics to educational reform. Dr. Barnes approached Dom again, this time with an official-looking document. I've drafted a preliminary proposal for the technical advisory position, she said, then smiled. Though I suppose we should wait until you've had a chance to wash your hands before handling the paperwork. The comment, which hours ago might have stung, now drew warm laughter from everyone within earshot. Dom looked at his oil-stained hands, the same hands that had fixed countless engines, helped build his son's science project, and had now opened doors he never expected. You know what this means, right, Dad? Noah asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. You can't complain anymore when I get my clothes dirty. Helping in the garage, it's for educational purposes. The gathering burst into laughter again, and Dom pulled his son into a tight hug, not caring about the grease stains anymore. Just wait until your first day teaching junior mechanics, he chuckled. You'll learn that some of the best lessons leave marks that don't wash off easily. As the sun began to set outside, casting an orange glow through the atrium's windows, Dom realized that this day had changed more than just his standing at Oak Ridge Prep. It showed everyone, including himself, that true value isn't measured by the cleanliness of your clothes or the prestige of your title, but by the impact you have on others' lives. Mr. Rivera, called out a young student, clutching a notebook filled with freshly drawn engine diagrams. Before you go, could you explain again how the hybrid system works? I want to show my mom when she picks me up. Dom smiled, reaching for the marker to draw one more diagram. Sometimes the greatest achievements in life come not from trying to fit in, but from having the courage to stand out, grease stains and all. 3 months after the science fair, Riverside Auto Works had transformed beyond recognition. The once modest garage now sported a newly renovated education wing, complete with classroom space and training equipment. But more importantly, it had become a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. On this particular Saturday morning, the sound of young voices mixed with the familiar clang of tools and whir of engines. Dom stood in the doorway of his shop, a cup of coffee in his still slightly greasy hands, watching as Noah led a group of students through the basics of engine maintenance. The sight of expensive private school uniforms now covered in learning's inevitable grease stains had become a regular weekend occurrence. Remember what my dad always says, Noah explained to his peers, pointing to a partially disassembled hybrid engine. Every machine has its own voice. You just have to learn how to listen. The students, a mix of kids from various backgrounds, leaned in closer, their faces showing the same fascination Dom had seen in Noah's eyes years ago. Robert Maxwell's daughter, Emily, raised her hand. The timing belt sounds different from last week, she noted, her designer clothes now sporting the proud marks of hands-on learning. Is that because of the adjustment we made? Dom smiled, remembering how just months ago her father had been concerned about grease on school furniture. Now Robert Maxwell was one of the garage's biggest supporters, having helped establish a scholarship program for students who couldn't afford the workshop fees. Good ear, Emily, Dom said, stepping forward. That's exactly what real mechanical intuition sounds like. It's not just about memorizing specs from a manual. It's about developing a feel for the machinery. Dr. Barnes, who had stopped by to observe the weekend program, made notes on her tablet. The success of the junior mechanics program had led to a complete overhaul of Oak Ridge Prep's STEM curriculum, with hands-on learning now playing a central role. "The improvement in our students' physics and engineering comprehension has been remarkable," she commented. "Other schools are starting to take notice." Indeed, what had started as a single father's moment of perceived embarrassment had sparked an educational revolution in their community. The garage now hosted regular workshops for students from schools across the district, breaking down barriers between theoretical education and practical experience. "Dad," Noah called out, wiping his hands on his work apron, a gift from his proud father. "Can you help us explain the hybrid regenerative braking system? We're trying to figure out how to improve its efficiency." As Dom moved through the workshop, he passed photos newly hung on the walls, pictures of students with their first successful repairs, newspaper clippings about the program's success, and in the center, the science fair project that had started it all. But his favorite was a simple snapshot of him and Noah, both covered in grease, grinning proudly after rebuilding their first engine together. Mrs. Pierce, who now coordinated the educational programs, was showing a group of visiting educators around the facility. "What Mr. Rivera and his son have created here goes beyond traditional education," she explained. "They've shown us that real learning happens when we break down artificial barriers between academic knowledge and practical skills." The morning's lessons continued as parents began arriving to pick up their children. Instead of rushing to leave, many stayed to watch and learn themselves. The garage had become more than just a repair shop or a classroom. It had become a community hub where learning knew no social bounds. "You know what's funny, Dad?" Noah said during a quiet moment, as they watched their students excitedly explaining mechanical concepts to their parents. "Remember how I used to worry about telling people you were a mechanic? Now half my friends wish their parents knew half as much about cars as you do." Dom wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders, neither of them minding the grease stains anymore. "Life has a way of teaching us what really matters, mijo. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most unexpected places." As the day wound down, Dom gathered everyone for their traditional end-of-session reflection. Students, parents, and educators formed a circle in the workshop, surrounded by the tools of their trade, both mechanical and educational. "When I started this journey," Dom addressed the group, "I thought I was just a mechanic who had somehow embarrassed himself at a fancy school event. But what I've learned from all of you is that every person has something valuable to teach, and every moment is an opportunity to learn. It doesn't matter if that knowledge comes from a textbook or from under the hood of a car." Looking at the faces around him, his son, the students, their parents, and the educators who had become part of this extended family, Dom realized that success wasn't measured by the cleanliness of your clothes or the prestigiousness of your title. It was measured by the lives you touched and the barriers you helped break down. As the group dispersed and the sun began to set over the expanded Riverside Auto Works, Noah turned to his father. "Hey, Dad, I've been thinking about next year's science fair project. How do you feel about electric vehicles?" Dom laughed, pulling his son close. "With you by my side, mijo, I feel ready for anything. After all, the best kind of learning is the kind we do together." And in that moment, as father and son stood in their grease-stained work clothes, surrounded by the fruits of their shared vision, they knew that they had built something far more valuable than just a successful business or educational program. They had built a bridge between worlds, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single moment of courage, and maybe a few grease stains along the way. The success of Riverside Auto Works' educational program had caught the attention of local media. One morning, as Dom was setting up for another weekend workshop, a sleek news van pulled into the parking lot. A well-dressed reporter and her camera crew stepped out, here to cover what they called the Revolutionary Garage School. "Mr. Rivera," the reporter, Lisa Chen from Channel 7 News, approached with a bright smile. "Your program has become quite the talk of the educational community. Would you mind if we filmed today's session? We'd love to show our viewers how you're changing these students' lives." Dom wiped his hands on his work cloth, suddenly conscious of his appearance again. "As long as it doesn't distract from the learning," he replied. "The kids come first." Noah, who had been organizing tools for the day's lesson, joined his father with a confident smile, so different from the nervous boy of just a few months ago. The workshop filled up as it did every weekend, But today there was an extra buzz in the air. Students whispered excitedly about being on TV, while parents tried to position themselves casually in the background of shots. Dr. Barnes had also arrived, along with representatives from 3 other local schools interested in implementing similar programs. Today, Dom announced to the gathered crowd, "We're going to learn something special. Everyone's talking about electric cars, but how many of you understand how they really work?" He pulled a tarp off a partially disassembled Tesla Model 3, donated by a grateful parent for educational purposes. The camera crew moved around the garage, capturing the genuine enthusiasm as students gathered around the vehicle. Emily Maxwell, now one of the program's star pupils, stepped forward to help demonstrate the basics of the electric drive system. "What's amazing," she explained to the camera with confidence that would have shocked her parents, "is how Mr. Rivera helps us understand complex systems by relating them to things we already know. Like how an electric motor's rotational force isn't that different from a traditional engine. It's just created differently." The reporter watched in amazement as students from different schools and social backgrounds worked together, their designer clothes and discount store wear equally marked with honest work. "This is more than just a mechanics class, isn't it?" she asked Dom during a brief interview. "Every time these kids pick up a wrench," Dom replied, "they're learning more than just how to fix cars. They're learning that real respect comes from what you can do, not what you wear or where you come from. They're learning that every problem has a solution if you're willing to get your hands dirty to find it." The camera panned across the garage, capturing Noah as he helped a younger student understand the intricacies of regenerative braking. "My dad taught me that every tool in this garage has a story," he told the reporter. "But the most important tool is the one between your ears. You have to think, understand, and most importantly, not be afraid to make mistakes." As the morning progressed, the camera crew captured moment after moment of genuine learning and collaboration. They filmed as Robert Maxwell, in a casual polo shirt rather than his usual business suit, joined his daughter in diagnosing an electrical system issue. They recorded Dr. Barnes explaining how the program had improved her students' understanding of physics and engineering principles. "The most remarkable thing," Dr. Barnes told the reporter, "is how this program has broken down barriers we didn't even realize we had built. We had been so focused on theoretical knowledge that we'd forgotten the importance of practical understanding. Mr. Rivera and Noah haven't just created a workshop. They've created a model for what education could be." Lisa Chen, the reporter, found herself drawn into the enthusiasm. During a break in filming, she shared how her own father had been a maintenance worker who had never finished high school. "He knew more about mechanical systems than any engineer I've met," she said, "but he always felt somehow less than them. I wish he could have seen this." The story was shaping up to be more than just a feel-good piece about an unusual education program. It was becoming a testament to how one moment of perceived embarrassment had sparked a revolution in how people thought about learning, expertise, and respect. As the day wound down, the camera crew prepared for their final shots. The reporter asked Dom for one last comment. Looking around at his transformed garage, at the faces of students eager to learn, at his son who stood tall with grease-stained hands and proud eyes, Dom smiled. "You know," he said, "someone once told me that success is measured by the size of your bank account or the cleanliness of your clothes. But looking around this garage, I see success measured in light bulb moments, in broken barriers, and in hands willing to work. That's a kind of wealth you can't put in a bank." The Channel 7 news story aired on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning, Riverside Auto Works' phone hadn't stopped ringing. Dom's inbox was flooded with emails from schools across the state, parents desperate to enroll their children, and even educational consultants wanting to franchise the program. The small garage that had once been a source of embarrassment was now at the center of an educational revolution. "Dad, look at this," Noah exclaimed, rushing into the garage with his laptop. "The video's gone viral. There are comments from teachers in Europe and Asia asking about your teaching methods." He scrolled through hundreds of responses, each one more enthusiastic than the last. Dom wiped his hands on his work cloth, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the attention. Robert Maxwell, who had stopped by for what had become his regular morning coffee at the garage, chuckled at Dom's expression. "Welcome to the world of viral success, my friend. The question is, what are you going to do with all this attention?" Before Dom could respond, Dr. Barnes arrived, practically buzzing with excitement. "The State Board of Education called this morning," she announced. "They want to discuss implementing similar programs across the district. They're talking about making hands-on mechanical education a required part of the STEM curriculum." The small office at the back of the garage had become an impromptu meeting room. Mrs. Pierce, who had taken on the role of program coordinator, was already making lists on the whiteboard. "We've got 23 schools wanting to schedule visits," she reported, "and that's just from this morning." Dom looked around at the eager faces, then through the office window at the students already gathering for the day's lessons. Emily Maxwell was showing a new student how to properly hold a wrench, her patient explanation echoing her mentor's teaching style. In the corner, Noah was helping a group understand the electrical diagrams for their latest project. "We need to be careful," Dom said thoughtfully. "What works here works because it's real, because we care about each student. We can't let this become just another educational trend that loses its soul in expansion." Sophia Chen, who had become one of the program's most dedicated students, poked her head into the office. "Mr. Rivera, there's a group of teachers from the technical college here to observe. Should I show them around like we practiced?" The pride in her voice was unmistakable. The once shy girl who had struggled with practical applications now moved through the garage with confidence, explaining complex mechanical concepts with ease. Her father, Dr. Chen, had told Dom that her grades in physics had jumped 2 levels since joining the program. "What if," Robert Maxwell suggested, leaning forward in his chair, "we create a teacher training program? Instead of trying to replicate this exactly, we could teach educators how to bring this approach to their own classrooms." Dr. Barnes nodded enthusiastically. "We could develop a curriculum that combines theoretical knowledge with practical application. The garage could become a training center for educators as well as students." Dom watched through the window as his regular students naturally paired up with the newcomers, sharing their knowledge with the same patience and pride he'd tried to instill in them. "Maybe that's the key," he said slowly. "We're not just teaching mechanics. We're teaching people how to learn from each other." The meeting continued as they mapped out possibilities. Mrs. Pierce suggested creating video tutorials to share online. Dr. Barnes talked about developing a formal certification program for teachers. Robert Maxwell offered to set up a foundation to fund similar programs in underprivileged areas. "But Dad," Noah interjected, showing wisdom beyond his years, "we can't forget what made this special in the first place. It wasn't just about learning mechanics, it was about breaking down walls between different kinds of people and different ways of learning." Dom smiled at his son, remembering the nervous boy at the science fair, who had worried about his father's grease-stained appearance. Now Noah moved confidently between the worlds of academic achievement and practical skill, helping others bridge that same gap. A commotion from the workshop drew their attention. A group of students had successfully started their first electric motor conversion project, and their cheers echoed through the garage. Dom watched as students from different schools, different social backgrounds, and different academic levels celebrated together, their shared achievement transcending all barriers. "You're right, mijo," Dom said, putting his arm around Noah's shoulders. "Whatever we do next has to keep that spirit. It's not just about engines and wrenches, it's about helping people find their own way to excellence." The group spent the rest of the morning planning their next steps. They would start small, training a few teachers at a time, ensuring that each new program maintained the personal touch that made Riverside Auto Works special. The garage would remain their headquarters, a living laboratory where theory and practice came together in perfect harmony. As the meeting concluded, a new group of students arrived for their lesson. Dom watched as Noah stepped forward to greet them, his confidence and teaching style a perfect blend of academic knowledge and hands-on experience. The son, who had once been embarrassed by his father's profession, now wore his own grease stains as badges of honor. The morning sun streamed through the newly installed skylights of Riverside Auto Works, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible just months ago. The garage had nearly tripled in size, with the original workspace now complemented by modern classrooms and a state-of-the-art workshop area. But today was special. The governor was coming to visit. Everything has to be perfect, Noah fretted, organizing tools with nervous energy. He had insisted on wearing his work coveralls rather than formal clothes for the occasion, a choice that made Dom's heart swell with pride. Around them, students and parent volunteers bustled about, preparing for what the media was calling a landmark moment in educational reform. "Mijo," Dom said, placing a calming hand on his son's shoulder. "Remember what we always say about perfection in mechanics?" Noah smiled, relaxing slightly. "Perfect is in the performance, not the appearance," he recited, then chuckled. "Just like that first day at the science fair, right?" Before Dom could respond, Robert Maxwell burst through the door, more disheveled than anyone had ever seen the usually polished businessman. "They're coming early. The governor's motorcade is 10 minutes out." The announcement sent everyone into controlled chaos, but Dom remained calm, much as he did when diagnosing a particularly troublesome engine. "Let them come," he said with quiet confidence. "We'll show them who we really are, not who we think they want us to be." Students quickly took their positions at various workstations, each one prepared to demonstrate different aspects of the program. Emily Maxwell stood proudly at her electric vehicle conversion project, while Sophia Chen readied her presentation on hybrid engine optimization. The garage hummed with anticipation and the quiet confidence of people who knew their worth. When the governor arrived, accompanied by education officials and media representatives, she found not a carefully choreographed show, but a genuine learning environment in full swing. Students of all ages and backgrounds worked side by side, their focus on their projects rather than the distinguished visitors. "Mr. Rivera," the governor said, extending her hand to Dom, who wasn't afraid to shake it despite the engine grease on his palm. "I've heard remarkable things about your program, though I must admit seeing it in person is quite different from reading the reports." Dom nodded, gesturing to the bustling workspace. "That's actually one of our core principles, Governor. Some things you have to experience to truly understand." He led her through the garage, where students confidently explained their projects and demonstrated their skills. Noah had gathered courage and was showing the education officials how they'd integrated traditional physics curriculum with hands-on learning. "You see," he explained, pointing to a partially disassembled engine, "when students understand the practical application of theoretical concepts, both become clearer. It's like having two languages to describe the same thing." The governor paused at each station, asking detailed questions and showing genuine interest. When she reached Emily Maxwell's electric vehicle project, her eyes widened in surprise. "This is remarkably advanced work for a high school student," she commented. "That's because we don't treat them like students who need to be taught," Dom explained, "but like mechanics who need to be guided. The difference might seem small, but it changes everything." Dr. Barnes, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "The impact on academic performance has been extraordinary," she added. "Our science and mathematics scores have improved significantly, but more importantly, student engagement has transformed completely." As the tour continued, Robert Maxwell shared the financial data showing how the program had become self-sustaining through a combination of regular auto repair work and educational programs. "It's a model that could be replicated across the state," he explained. Brensonen. Practical education within reach of every community. The governor listened intently, occasionally making notes on her tablet. Near the end of the tour, she paused to address the gathered crowd. "When my staff first brought this program to my attention, I was skeptical," she admitted. We've seen many educational initiatives come and go, but what you've created here is something entirely different." She turned to Dom and Noah. "You haven't just created a vocational program or an academic enhancement. You've shown us how to break down the artificial barriers we've built between different types of learning, different types of success." As if to emphasize her point, a cheer erupted from one of the workstations where a group of students had just successfully diagnosed a complex electrical problem. The governor smiled at their genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Rivera," she said, turning back to Dom, "how would you feel about helping us develop a statewide initiative based on your program? Not to replicate it exactly. I understand now that what makes this special is its heart, but to take its principles and help other communities create their own versions?" Dom looked around at his expanded but still humble garage. He saw Noah, standing tall in his grease-stained coveralls. He saw students who had once been divided by social barriers now working together as equals. He saw parents who had once judged him now proudly wearing their own work aprons. "Governor," he replied, "we'd be honored. But with one condition, we keep it real. No shortcuts, no compromises on quality, and most importantly, no forgetting that every student who walks through these doors deserves the chance to find their own way to excellence." The governor's visit had catalyzed something extraordinary. 1 month later, Riverside Auto Works hosted what the media dubbed the Future of Education Summit. Educators, industry leaders, and policymakers from across the country filled the expanded garage space, which had been transformed into a conference venue while still maintaining its working character. The smell of oil and metal still lingered in the air. Dom had insisted on keeping the garage operational even during the summit. "This isn't a show," he had explained to the organizing committee. "They need to see it living and breathing." Noah stood at the entrance, greeting visitors alongside his father. Both wore their work coveralls, though Noah had added his science fair winner's pin to his. The contrast between their practical attire and the business suits of many attendees created a powerful visual reminder of the program's core message. "Welcome to Riverside Auto Works," Noah said confidently to each new arrival. The nervous boy who had once worried about his father's appearance at school was now proudly leading CEOs and superintendents through their working garage with the expertise of a seasoned educator. Dr. Barnes took the stage first, presenting the remarkable data they'd gathered over the past months. "We've seen a 40% improvement in physics comprehension, a 35% increase in mathematical problem-solving abilities, and perhaps most importantly, a 90% reduction in student disengagement across all participating schools." Robert Maxwell followed with the economic impact analysis. "The program has created a sustainable model where practical education and commercial services support each other. But the real return on investment isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in transformed lives." Throughout the morning, successful students from the program demonstrated their projects. Emily Maxwell and Sophia Chen had collaborated on an electric vehicle charging system that drew gasps of appreciation from the engineering professors in attendance. Their presentations seamlessly blended complex theoretical concepts with practical applications, exemplifying the program's integrated approach. "What we've learned here," Emily explained to the crowded room, "goes beyond mechanics. Mr. Rivera and Noah taught us that understanding comes through doing, that theory and practice are two sides of the same coin." During the lunch break, Dom found himself surrounded by educators eager to understand the program's success. "The secret," he told them, wiping his hands on his ever-present shop rag, "is that we never try to separate the academic from the practical. Every problem is both, just like in real life." Mrs. Pierce, who had organized the summit, was busy fielding questions about implementation strategies. "We're not selling a one-size-fits-all solution," she explained. "We're sharing a philosophy that can be adapted to each community's needs." The afternoon sessions focused on practical demonstrations. Students who had once been strangers divided by social and economic barriers now worked together with seamless efficiency. They showed the visitors how theoretical physics came alive in engine dynamics, how mathematical principles revealed themselves in electrical systems. "Watch this," Noah said, leading a group of education officials to a workstation where a team of students was diagnosing a complex engine problem. They're not just following a manual, they're applying everything they've learned from physics to problem-solving methodology. The officials watched in amazement as the students worked through the problem, their discussion effortlessly blending academic terminology with practical knowledge. One superintendent leaned over to Dom and whispered, "I haven't seen students this engaged in 20 years of education." As the day progressed, Dom noticed something remarkable happening. The suits and coveralls had begun to mingle, the artificial barriers between academic and practical dissolving in the face of genuine learning and collaboration. CEOs rolled up their sleeves to join student demonstrations, while professors eagerly participated in hands-on diagnostic sessions. Near the end of the summit, a surprise visitor arrived, Lisa Chen, the reporter whose original story had helped spark the program's viral fame. She had brought with her a film crew and something special, letters from viewers around the world whose lives had been touched by the Riverside Auto Works story. "Mr. Rivera," she said, handing him a thick stack of correspondence, "these are just a fraction of the responses we've received. Your story has resonated with people everywhere who felt caught between different worlds, who needed someone to show them that excellence doesn't wear a uniform." As Dom read a few of the letters aloud, the garage fell silent. Stories of parents and children finding new ways to connect, of students discovering their passion for learning, of communities bridging long-standing divides. Each letter reflected the larger impact of what had started as one father's determination to support his son's science fair project. The summit concluded with an impromptu gathering in the original garage space. Dom stood next to Noah, both of them still in their work coveralls, now slightly more stained from the day's demonstrations. Looking out at the diverse crowd of educators, industry leaders, students, and parents, all united in their enthusiasm for genuine learning, Dom felt a profound sense of accomplishment. 1 year to the day after that fateful science fair, Dom stood in the expanded parking lot of Riverside Auto Works, now flanked by both the original garage and the new Educational Innovation Center. The morning sun glinted off the fresh paint of the center's sign, which bore the program's new motto, "Excellence has many tools." Today was graduation day, not for a traditional school year, but for the first official class of the Riverside Technical Education Program. Students from across the state had completed the year-long curriculum that blended academic excellence with practical mastery. The parking lot was filled with a mix of luxury cars and work trucks, a visual testimony to how the program had bridged social divides. "Can you believe it all started with a hybrid engine model and a grease-stained coverall?" Noah asked, adjusting his graduation robe over his work clothes. Like the other graduating students, he had insisted on wearing his coveralls under the traditional graduation attire, a symbol of their dual achievement. Dom smiled, remembering that nervous morning when he'd rushed to the science fair, worried about embarrassing his son. "Sometimes the best things in life start with a moment of doubt," he replied, straightening Noah's collar. The ceremony space had been set up in the garage itself, with tools and engines providing a fitting backdrop to the rows of chairs. Dr. Barnes had suggested hosting it in the school auditorium, but the students had unanimously voted to graduate in the space where their transformation had begun. Emily Maxwell, now headed to MIT with a full scholarship, took the podium as class speaker. "A year ago," she began, "many of us thought we knew what success looked like. We thought it wore expensive suits and worked in corner offices. Then a mechanic in grease-stained coveralls taught us that true excellence doesn't care what you're wearing. It cares what you can do, what you can learn, and most importantly, what you can teach others." The audience, a mix of proud parents, educators, and community members, nodded in understanding. Robert Maxwell, sitting in the front row, wiped a tear as his daughter continued her speech. He no longer wore his usual business suit, having adopted the business casual style that had become the norm among the program's supporters. "Mr. Rivera and Noah showed us that the greatest achievements happen when we stop trying to fit into someone else's definition of success," Emily continued. "They taught us that every problem is an opportunity, every mistake is a lesson, and every person has something valuable to contribute. As the graduates were called one by one, each demonstration project was highlighted alongside their academic achievements. Sophia Chen's electric vehicle optimization system had already been picked up by a major manufacturer. Another student had developed a revolutionary diagnostic tool that combined artificial intelligence with mechanical expertise. When it was Noah's turn, Dom felt his chest swell with pride. His son had not only excelled in the program, but had become its heart, helping to design curriculum that would be used in similar programs across the country. The scared boy who had once worried about his father's appearance had grown into a confident young man who understood that true value came from the perfect blend of knowledge and application. The ceremony concluded with a surprise announcement. Dr. Barnes stepped forward with an official-looking document. The State Board of Education, in partnership with leading technical universities, has officially recognized the Riverside curriculum as an accredited educational model. Starting next year, our graduates will receive both technical certification and academic credits accepted at major universities. The cheers that erupted were deafening. Parents who had once been skeptical of the program's value were now its biggest advocates. The success of their children, measured not just in grades and college acceptances but in confidence, capability, and character, had proven that education could bridge any divide. As the celebration continued, Dom found a quiet moment with Noah near his original workbench, which had been preserved exactly as it was on that first science fair morning. "You know, mijo," he said, running his hand along the worn surface, "when I rushed to your science fair that day, covered in grease and worried about embarrassing you, I never imagined where it would lead." Noah leaned against the bench, a mirror image of his father's posture. "I think that's the biggest lesson we learned, Dad. Sometimes the things we're most afraid of become our greatest strengths. Every student who comes through these doors learns that success isn't about fitting in. It's about standing up for who you are and what you can contribute." Together, they watched as the graduates mingled with family and friends, their robes open to proudly display their work clothes beneath. The garage that had once seemed out of place in their prestigious community had become a symbol of educational revolution, a place where barriers fell away and true learning flourished. "Ready for another year?" Dom asked, picking up a wrench from his toolbox. Noah grinned, reaching for his own set of tools. "Always, Dad. We've got a lot more walls to break down." And in that moment, as father and son stood in their now famous garage, they knew that their greatest achievement wasn't in the buildings they'd expanded or the programs they'd created, but in showing the world that sometimes the most powerful education comes from having the courage to be exactly who you are, grease stains and all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.